Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome City Journal Board Editor Brian Anderson.
Thank you. Good evening, everyone. Thank you for coming. I'm Brian Anderson, as was just mentioned. I'm the editor of City Journal, and I want to welcome you on behalf of the Manhattan Institute tonight's conversation between two remarkable figures, Ed Latimore and my colleague Rob Henderson. Our special guest is Ed Latimore. He grew up in the public housing projects of Pittsburgh. He's a former professional heavyweight boxer, a U.S. Army veteran, and best-selling author. Over a 12-year boxing career, he fought under Rock Nation Sports, trained with Hall of Fame coaches, and retired with a very impressive 13-1-1 record. Outside the ring, Ed rebuilt his life after getting sober in 2013, went on to earn a degree in physics, and turned to writing and teaching. His best-selling Not Caring What Other People Think is a Superpower has reached hundreds of thousands of readers, and his brand new book, which will be discussed tonight, Hard Lessons from the Hurt Business, Boxing, and the Art of Life, is a guide to pushing through adversity told through 12 rounds of tough lessons. Today, Ed reaches an enormous and engaged audience through his website, newsletter, and social media, where more than 250,000 followers engage with his reflections on self-mastery, self-improvement, and personal growth. Interviewing Ed tonight is Rob Henderson. He's a fellow at the Manhattan Institute and a contributing editor at City Journal. He's widely known for coining the term luxury beliefs. It's going to be the subject of his next book, the idea that many cultural views embraced by today's elites, while seemingly progressive, often impose costs on those further down the social ladder. His acclaimed memoir, Troubled, a memoir of foster care, family, and social class, recounts the difficult path that his life has taken, which bears some similarities with Ed's, from a childhood marked by instability and foster care to service in the U.S. Air Force and later to academic studies at Yale and Cambridge. For City Journal, he's written on everything from woke AI to the growing disconnect between the politics of young men and young women. Rob also has built a significant following on social media with a wide and expanding audience on X, and has a heavily subscribed Substack newsletter. Tonight's conversation, is bringing together two men through very different paths. They've confronted hardship, rebuilt their lives, and developed powerful insights into class, culture, and human flourishing. Before I turn things over to Rob, I invite you all to engage further with our work at City Journal and the Manhattan Institute as well. So please sign up for our newsletters and tune into our podcasts, the City Journal podcast in 10 blocks. I hope you will participate as we continue to facilitate interesting conversations like tonight's. So please join me in welcoming Rob Henderson and Ed Latimore. Thank you.
All right. Well, thank you, Brian. Thank you to Ed for being here, and thanks to all of you for coming out this evening. I recently wrote a review of Hard Lessons for the Hurt Business for City Journal, and as I was writing it, I was thinking back to how I first came across your work, Ed. So this was in 2019, what was then called Twitter, and I enjoyed your posts on, as Brian was saying, self-mastery, discipline, overcoming obstacles, avoiding catastrophes on your path to success. And then later I discovered your more substantive online writing on your website, discovered how you grew up, and I noticed there are some similarities, difficult upbringing, obstacles in our path in our childhoods, winding indirect path through with social mobility, with reaching through the military, through higher education, and that made me appreciate your writing even more. We both graduated from college relatively late in life, One difference is that Ed got his degree in physics, which is a science, and I got my degree in psychology, which is a scam. I'm kidding. I love my home discipline of psychology. But I thought, Ed, we could start with you telling us what it was like for you growing up in the Pittsburgh public housing projects, and then when it was that you realized that this environment was having a negative influence on you.
So the first part of that is really interesting, just because that question's come up a lot recently in the past week, and it really gave me some time to reflect on, well, what was it like? Because at this point, I'm 40 now, and I haven't spent significant time in that neighborhood, in that area, since I was 14. It's not I didn't move. I just was in a position to stop spending significant time there until I was 18 and could move out. But when I think back to it, it's a lot like it's a constant mid-level, not low-level, constant mid-level stress, because there's all this, violence is everywhere, but it's in ways you don't necessarily think about. So there's the violence at school, dealing with bullies, fighting a lot, and we call them bullies because that's the best word for them. These guys were, they're just mean people with a violent streak, and you have to, you cross paths with them, and you learn very quickly that you can't really avoid these types of people. You just have to deal with them. Otherwise, you're going to have to deal with them even more. So that's at school. And then your neighborhood in general is just, for all intents and purposes, a war zone. I realized how odd it was when I got friends not from the projects, that they had never heard gunfire before, randomly. They had never dealt with, hitting the dirt when a drive-bys happened or something like that. That was just it was a normal part of my childhood, and I didn't realize that wasn't normal until I met some people that hadn't gone through that. And then there's the domestic stuff where I'm at home and, my dad's not around. And I think a lot of people have this idea that, women can't be abusive. Nah, my mom beat the hell out of me, man. And it wasn't there's some discipline elements there, but there's also a lot of it, when I look at it, it was a cathartic thing for her. She would feel better, and the beating severity would depend on how bad she felt. And once she felt better, that's when the beating stopped. And and that only lasted until there's no pride in this. It just is what it is. You reach a point where you can go, okay, well, you can hit me, but now I can hit you back. So you should probably make a decision here, because I've already made one. And so my life got easier in that regard, especially after puberty and you get older, and I'm not a small person, but. As far as what was the other part of that question?
When you started to realize this environment was having a negative influence on you.
So you don't realize, what you're going through when you're going through it, and until you try and do something else, you don't even know what happened or why it happened. I don't remember a clear early youth where I was like, wow, this is crazy, man. I'm a mess. I do remember when I realized that I hadn't learned some basic life skills. When my dad died, he died when I was 18. And I guess he had a heart, because he left us some life insurance money. Me specifically and my sister, but now I was 18, so I got it all. Got all $55,000 of it, plus I think because I was a minor the year he died, but I didn't turn 18, I was entitled to some Social Security payments. All said and done, probably about $58,000 just dropped into me. $58,000 in 2003 money. And in 18 months, I was overdrafting my account so I could have enough money for food. I don't know where that money went, but I know when I think about that story, I go, wow, I really had no concept of how to spend or manage money or live a life. It goes, oh, this is a real gift. And boop, there it's gone, and nothing happened to it. But emotionally, honestly, probably when my son was born, that's when I was like, okay, there are a lot of things that I'm just low level angry about. And I didn't realize that until I was looking at my son, and I've got this person that I care about and I love, and I'm like, how could someone do anything mean to him? I mean, one day someone will, but it's not my job or my wife's job to do that. And that's what I felt like. I just wanted answers and I wanted to understand things, and it was impossible to. Uh, but that's when I realized, there's a lot of stuff floating around in the background, and it's directly related to my childhood.
Yeah, when I was working on Troubled and I was writing those early chapters about my own upbringing, 5, 6, 7 years old, and then I would go out and see a 6-year-old kid and think, wow, that's the size I was, that's the level of immaturity I was when I was going through all of that. And at the time, as a little kid, there's a coping response. You think you're tough as a little kid in a tough environment, but when you're that small, you're
Those
vulnerable.
early chapters, like if you read Rob's book and then mine, like you start at the beginning of that early life. Those I was talking to you about it when I was going through it. Those were hard things to write about because you've not thought about them. It's not like you forgot or it's like you buried them. You just haven't thought about them. And when you think about them again, to put them down and tell a story, it's like you had this wound and it healed up and there's not even a scab on it, but somehow you figured out how to pick it off and now it's bleeding and it's like worse. It feels worse. But you can also cope with it now. You can't cope with it when you're a child. So
Well, I wanted to go back to your comment about violence and school bullies, and you tell a story in your book about being arrested when you were in middle school after you pulled a prank and got into a fight. Could you tell us that story?
so if somebody here, follows me on social media, I make jokes sometimes about crackheads. They're just hilarious to me, and I don't know why. But to me, that's my way of you can laugh a little or cry a lot, or I can't remember what that French poet is, but he's like life's a comedy for those who think and a tragedy for those who feel. So I felt like I would laugh a lot, and it would be a comedy to me. I didn't realize not everyone has the same sense of humor. So in the eighth grade, I said, it's going to be funny. I'm going to take some sugar and I'm going to put it in a bag and go to school like I'm selling drugs. Never mind that, I'm sure no one in here actually knows this, and this is new knowledge, but sugar doesn't look like cocaine. And only a rookie would think it does. But I took it, and this kid thought he was offended because I guess he had some relatives that were cokeheads, or maybe he knew somebody that had got caught up in the game. Either way, he was mad at me. Now, he was also looking for a reason to kick my ass for a long time, and I finally gave him one. So we get into this fight and everything, and then it's a pretty vicious fight. I still remember this fight and how swollen and how hurt I was. And he was a big kid. He threw an overhead. You guys remember those overhead projectors? He grabbed one of those and threw them at me. And I dodged it like Neo from The Matrix, and it was crazy. But eventually we ended up, in the principal's office and what's going on. And they find out what's going on. And the cops come in and they're like, well, we got to arrest you because he explains why the fight started. And I'm like, whoa, it was fake. What do you mean you got to arrest me? Turns out there's something called a cosmetic lookalike drug. Or, that if you sell something under the intent that it is that thing, and you get pinched, you're going to be charged like you had been actually selling that drug.
The phrase simulated sale of a controlled
simulated
substance.
sale of a controlled substance. That's what it is, yeah. So just to keep guys from, they call them dummy rocks. And they put me in the back of the paddy wagon, and they proceed to take me off. And
These were the police officers.
The police officers, yeah. And then about 5 minutes into the ride, they stop and they come in and they take the cuffs off, and they're like, all right. So, they tell me they're not going to arrest me, but they tell me that, if I had done that in the street, I could have got killed. And that I should just, give up on this thing because it's not, a thing for me. And that lesson, I'm happy I got that lesson the hard way or not the hard way. It could have been worse. I could have actually been arrested. That really changed, it got scared straight. There you go. Like that some people got to go see the actual criminals in jail. I just had to be on the trip there, and then they let me go. And at that point, it's not like I was a bad kid doing stuff like that anyway, but I definitely stopped anything like that. I never did anything like that again.
Yeah, around this same time, I think maybe it was in high school. Well, I want to read a post that you shared on X, and then a follow-up question about your book. So you write here that you were part of a birth tracking study. So you got an IQ test every 2 years, and your IQ was an average of 100 to 108. So kind of on the higher side of average until you got to high school, and then it shot up to 130 to 135. And you say that the biggest change that you were no longer going to school in the hood, and your friends were smart kids with stable families. And in your book, you write about having friends that had stable families. That was the next best thing to having one yourself. And you describe these experiences with your childhood friend Eli, who was this upper middle class Jewish kid. Can you tell us, how you met Eli, and then what you learned from spending time with him, his family, and with him?
First, that's great journalism. Because I totally forgot about that tweet. I remember exactly when I got that, those results, and I was puzzled. I was like, I thought IQ was fixed, and it turns out there's some things that can really boost it if you're on the lower end. Well, it wasn't low, but we'll get into it. So all of those bad experiences, that was the middle school. I said earlier about, 14. Well, with 14, I go to high school, and I couldn't deal with my environment anymore. I made a very conscious choice at 14 to apply to a high school all the way across town. And I got to that one. It was a very different socioeconomic environment. I was lonely. There was no one there from my neighborhood, my side of the city, really. But, you eventually make friends with people. And one of the first people I made friends with was Eli and Kyle, but Eli, the subject of this story. And we became friends because, we were sitting there, we were talking trash in biology about who was better at Marvel versus Capcom. And I thought I was the man. They thought they were the man. And like men, we settled it at the arcade one day. And we took the bus out to Monroeville Mall. We went to the arcade, and this is, we put our quarters down and played. And I don't know if anybody, said, all right, you got this. But at the end of the trip, his mom came and picked us up, and we had dinner at his house. This is probably the first time I'd ever seen two-parent household. I thought that was cool. And then we just became friends. We stayed friends. I actually sent him an email yesterday about something. But it's not just Eli's friendship. Eli's family embraced me. They took me in like I was one of their own. The story I tell in the book that really, highlights, I think, how much love they had for me. And they understood my situation. Even today when I bring it up, they're like, and I'm like, you guys just being nice. It was messed up, and you were saving, protecting me. So as the crow flies, my neighborhood, Northview Heights in Pittsburgh, was probably about 25, 30 minutes away from where they lived in Squirrel Hill. Every night, without fail, they would let me come over and eat dinner. This is even after football practice, or if Eli was there or not. They let me come over and eat dinner and then drive me home. And I think back to this, and I'm like, this is an old Jewish guy driving me through the projects at night. That is ballsy. That's love. And he did it every night without no complaints. It was never, we can't do it tonight, or you've been here too much. And that experience, I didn't realize it years later. It really gave me space for the first time to be a kid. My school gave me space to be a kid. I can go, you're supposed to learn, and that's what they tell you, but school is social. but I could have like a normal social experience because I wasn't worried about somebody trying to kick my ass all the time. I could be nice and have fun. And those people, all my friends, I mean, Eli, they were just, the Horowitzes were just, the single biggest influence. But all of my friends and their families, just they embraced me, and that gave me space again to be a kid. And like, wow, this is like kind of normal and cool. It's fun.
Yeah, on the point about the test scores, I think you mentioned you thought the scores were fixed. There's it depends on the environment. Once you reach a certain level of material security and stability, then it becomes much harder to lift it. But one thing that people misunderstand about IQ, I think, is that if you get a high score on an IQ test, it probably means you're smart. If you get a low score, there could be a lot of reasons for that. So one is, maybe you're not academically inclined, but other reasons could be, malnutrition. It could be lack of sleep. It could be poverty. It could be instability, dysfunction, lack of motivation. There's a bunch of reasons other than not being smart for why you would score low on an IQ test. On this point, Ed, so did you met Eli was this at the gifted program?
This
or-
wasn't
yeah.
at the gifted program.
Okay.
So in terms of that, so our school district had this thing called the gifted program. Teachers would like identify you as a little, smarter or more motivated or whatever. You do a test, you do well on that test, and you get to go one day a week to one school where other kids from other schools who also did well on that test, you guys would, work together with, without the distraction of the normies, right? Then I got to.
I'll ask you about that in a second.
But in high school, that program didn't exist quite the way it existed in middle school and elementary school. It still existed, and this is actually a point, I think it was just from a narrative standpoint, it was hard to kind of weave in and make it make sense. But the classes that I was in at Shinley, they called them CAS at this point, Center for Advanced Studies. How pretentious. And those kids, they were all kids who came from the gifted program. So I ended up in classes with those type of kids at Shinley High School, which is where I met Eli. So not technically at the gifted center, but at the program.
The school you were at before, you mentioned your middle school was chaotic, and you describe how it wasn't that all of these kids were rambunctious and mischievous and troublemakers. Rather, it was a small percentage of them that would disturb the learning process for everyone else. So tell us what that was like for you.
It was the distorted ghetto Pareto distribution. There were like 5 to 8 kids, and they caused almost all of the issues constantly. And the problem with this, you can't just, put them in a box or something. They're in the class, and behavior is contagious. So you get, the kid that's always going to start some type of conversation with someone or talk back to the teacher. So we can't, progress and move forward. We can't do anything because we're dealing with this 1 or 2 individuals. And then everyone else, they're like dogs. They smell fear. They go, okay, well, this teacher is not going to stand up to that person, and so it makes it easier for other kids to fall out of line. It just ended up being a kind of a cascade of ignorance.
Yeah, I think there's this mistaken view that if you put those kids in the same classroom with smart kids like you, then they'll become smart too. But what actually happens is the reverse, where the smart kids start to behave like the less well-behaved kids.
One of my favorite, ideas or quotes to sum it up is like, when you play in the mud and you have white gloves on, like the mud doesn't get glovier. It always ends up being drawn down. Like it's an equalizing effect. You don't get pulled up any more than people get pulled down. It averages it out. And if somebody is really, really trying to pull the average down, and no one's like, you got to get out, they're going to have a destructive effect.
The other thing you point out is that these students, the small percentage, the 5% of the students who were responsible for 99% of the suspensions, that the teachers would pass them through each grade. There was no failing. Is that right?
Because they don't want to deal with them anymore. Look, I'm not saying it's right, but I understand.
Well, during this time, you also talk about spending a lot of time in libraries. It sounded like you were trying to spend time kind of away from home. And at a certain point, you describe how you talk about the challenges of poverty and deprivation, but you also write that good parents matter more than money. Can you explain what you meant by that?
So, side note, when I was writing that book, I wrote the wrong book first. It was a cool book, but it wasn't the right book. And in that book, I ended up doing a lot of research on just a lot of ideas and things that I had observed in my life. And one of the things I found out is that they've looked at the income of people at 30, and they can make a pretty good guess what it will be based on what their income, the average income was of their childhood. And so the poorer you are, the more likely you are to be poor at 30. Except in one case, looking at the urban poverty versus rural poverty, kids who grow up poor in a rural environment, they don't seem to suffer from this nearly as much. It almost completely vanishes. And why is that? Well, it turns out, urban poverty is distinct, like a single mother and bad decisions that keep you in certain neighborhoods where you're surrounded by other people who will reinforce those bad decisions. Rural poverty is, I guess, a bit different. And a big difference is that a lot of times it's a two-parent household still being there, still showing love, still providing, this supportive environment. And it just so happens that whether it's, a function of the economy, like there's not a lot of people around to service what they do, or they chose the small town life for whatever reason and they're not independently wealthy, all of these things, but their poverty is not for the same reasons as the inner city poverty. And one of the big things, the big differences is like it's almost a choice. Almost, I won't say that it's a stable environment and good parents. Just thinking about what I've seen, because I've seen more people without good parents than with good parents. Over the sum of my life total, not that much more at this point, being 40, but I've seen more of that. And we absorb so much from the people who we spend almost all of our time with. I know that's shocking, but the people we spend almost all of our time with for the first 10 years of our life, we absorb so much from them, good and bad, that meant much of, they're not even thinking about passing on.
When you get to college, you describe how you, based on everything that you had experienced up until that point, the first time you enrolled in college, you were not prepared for that level of autonomy. And I'm assuming this was roughly around the same time you squandered that life insurance money from your father. Say more about that, about being unprepared for freedom and how you came to understand that.
Yeah, so I thought that, okay, I did okay. Well, no, I didn't do okay, but I survived. I went through a high school, and I didn't have like a stable home to go home to, and it was like, food was, I could get food, but like college has got this like, I don't have to travel an hour to get to school, and I can come home and study, and I'll be able to eat. It'll be great. Well, that stuff really helps if you like know how to use it. If you're like not ready for it at all, you know what it's like? It's like if you go get if you bring in like a stray dog, it's kind of been strayed for a little while, and you go, hey dog, we got a house and some food and some love for you. Can you chill out? And he's gonna look at you and be like, no, and bite you and bark, and it'll take forever for if he ever breaks and normalizes. It's a lot what it was like going into this new environment with all of these old underlying habits that I hadn't dealt with. And I mean, washed out. Like the first semester, I played football. The first semester, I distinctly remember being told by someone, one of the coaches, like, I don't understand. I think you're a smart guy, but you have the lowest GPA on the football team by far. And I was on academic probation. I got it up just a little bit in the second semester. And then in the third semester, it was going bad. And I knew they were about to kick me out. So I said, you know what? You can't fire me. I quit. And I dropped out because I wasn't ready for that environment.
Yeah, this is one reason, among others, why I say it's important, when we talk about social mobility and helping kids succeed from disadvantaged backgrounds, is you have to look at what happens before the age of 18 as well as after. We think, okay, the kids are 18, how many of them are going to college? How many of them are achieving some kind of upward mobility? But even if you are, I mean, this is one of the lessons I think of your book and maybe of mine, is even if you have a kid who has some raw ability, but you put them in a very difficult environment, that ability is not going to express itself. And so, it matters, family, stable environment, schools, ensuring that, there's some level of stability and discipline and, that are being enforced.
It's one of the cruelest jokes that like nature's played on us. The two things that have the biggest outcome on our future, or the biggest effect on our future, are family and the neighborhood we live in, because of that family. We don't get any say in that at all. And research shows that matters a lot. I read this great paper that said, titled, Zip Code Isn't Destiny, but it's as strong as gravity. And it was about this teacher from Atlanta. He's writing about, one of the students. He was comparing two students, and one of them ended up, going to another district, just a zip code over or a district over, and there were just more resources, and it was just easier for him to develop and flourish. But you get no say in these things as a kid, and I'll never say that we don't have agency and control over the decisions we make. I'll never say that. I'll die by that. But I also have seen enough to know that where you start kind of matters. I describe it like poker. Everybody over time does, skill will even out the game, right? No matter where you start. But if you get a string of bad hands, because probability is clumpy, if you get a string of bad hands at the beginning and you get knocked out early, or you don't get a good hand before you get eaten away by the blinds and the antes, well, you lose the game. And it was just timing sometimes.
Yeah, well, you're speaking here about the importance of agency, personal responsibility, of course, but then you're also describing, the analogy of the zip code like gravity. So how do you personally reconcile those things of, there are these structural disadvantages. You can get dealt multiple bad hands in a row, but on the other hand, you're saying we also have some responsibility for ourselves and our lives. So how do you think about those things?
I tend to think in terms of generations, because after a certain point, it becomes unlikely, though not impossible, for someone to spontaneously change, and do things differently. But what you can do is like, in my case, like I recognize there's a lot of things that I have to work on still in my life. And I look at my son and I go, what's cool? You get to start so much further ahead. So in the next, I guess, generation, they're not going to have to deal with a lot of the same issues. I'm not discarding the individual who is suffering whatsoever, but I'm also being realistic, and I know that it's going to be very hard to change them, especially if they don't want to. That's the other thing too. It's amazing how many people don't realize something's wrong because they haven't even been exposed to something different to know. There's no comparison. There's no basic comparison. Once you have a basic comparison, and a person decides we can work with people who want to do things differently. The people who don't, we hope they don't do anything to hurt anyone else. And in the meantime, we focus on building our future. Because one of the great things, I believe this at least, okay, so there's no replacement for good parents. But there is a lot we can do with putting kids in a good environment. That's kind of what our stories are about. You change the environment, you change it early on, or you introduce someone or something that makes a difference, and you can salvage a lot before it all goes, pear-shaped.
Yeah, I think that's right. And one point that I've tried to make in some of my writing is that even something like agency, I think, follows a normal distribution where there are people who, if you are academically inclined and high agency and have a few other intrinsic attributes, then your odds are a little better of surviving and getting out of a difficult environment. But there are a lot of people who aren't equipped in the same way to do that. And so, we should be thinking about how to promote ideas, which I think is what you do in your writing, is giving people the tools to seek success and avoid catastrophe, even if you don't have a whole suite of specialized talents. That almost everyone can make small, minor decisions each day to incrementally improve their lives, or you could make a series of incremental decisions to worsen your life as well. But I'm actually curious. So it was in the Army National Guard, is that right? So what was going on in your mind before you decided to enlist? Where were you at in your life?
Well, I was drinking a lot, man. Like I was telling this story yesterday. I worked at T-Mobile. I was selling phones for $9.28 an hour, and it's a miserable job. So I would go in early because there was a bar across the street, and I'd get my pre-drink on, and then in my lunch break, I'd make sure I go and get it, and then afterwards, well, if it's not too late, have another drink. I bring this up, not to romanticize drinking, but to just give you an idea where my life was at this point. And then one day, I got all frustrated because things weren't really bad one night after close, and I said I need to give myself some more options in life, because at this point I had a very, very good amateur boxing career, but it's amateur boxing, by definition, it's not paying me, and I just needed more from life.
How old were you at this time?
How old am I now? 28. It was 27, 28. So, and so I said, well, let's go back to school. Let's see what we can do. And then once I realized going back to school was going to be the play, then it was, let's get money for school. And then the Army came into play.
And so which experience do you think helped to equip you more with learning discipline and mastery and those things? Or would you say they're kind of equal, your experiences with boxing or with the Army?
Okay, so me personally, boxing, by far. Most people, Army. And I think the reason for that is because of the age discrepancy or age difference. By the time I went to the Army, look, I went in 28 doing basic training with 18, 19-year-olds. I thought basic training was more or less easy, kind of put one foot in front of the other. But I can see how if I'm an 18-year-old kid right out of high school, this is going to be rough. But for me, it was just like, all right, man, you telling me I just get to chill out, no one's going to talk to me, all I got to do is run fast, and you'll tell me when to eat. Like, I don't want them to tell me when to eat and have no control, but at the same time, I don't have to worry about food or anything like that for a little while. I can just focus. All right, so that, I can see why it's more transformative for a young person than an old person. But for someone in my situation, boxing really forced a lot of changes, because I always say about boxing, you'll make a mistake once, you'll learn from it. You might make that mistake twice, but you probably aren't going to survive to make it a third time. So either boxing is going to kick you out or beat you out, or you'll learn and develop. If you let boxing do its job, it will make you a better person.
What's something that, and this will be the last question, I think, before we start getting questions from the audience, is what do you think is the most misunderstood thing about boxing that you hear from people who are unfamiliar with this sport?
I think people think that there is some type of financial reward in the sport. Man, I don't know any boxer, outside of guys even guys you see on TV who don't have a job of some sort on the side. So yeah, that's like kind of a practical thing. In terms of a kind of a mindset thing that's a little harder to touch, I think people don't realize how painful the sport is and what you have to do and what type of person you have to be to continue doing it. I think there's something wrong with everybody that boxes at some point, and that's the same with me,
I heard you tell this story once. It was a boxing coach who would, when prospective fighters would approach him, he would ask, did your parents beat you when you were a kid? And if they said no, he said, then you don't have what it takes.
Yeah, that was Hal Adonis, the old director of USA Boxing, who, not that common. There's some other crazier things he said that got him fired. And like just for, I know it's really hard to get fired from that job. But he got fired. But yeah, he says, that your parents beat you, and if not, you don't have what it takes. Directionally, that's about right. Because you remember, most people, they do what they can to avoid a physical confrontation. And if they get in a physical confrontation, they do everything they can to not get hurt. But people who box, people who fight for a living, they have decided that this is fun. Because they definitely aren't doing it for the money. I can tell you that right now.